Roman scientists, like Vitruvius, had made detailed studies of water. They tested it by boiling it away and studying the residue it left. They considered the effects of contamination from different soils and looked at the plants attracted to water: bulrushes, wild osiers, alders, withy, and reeds. Later, under the Emperor Trajan, an entire government department was set up, headed by a famous engineer called Frontinus.
Frontinus was Trajan's water engineer and an extraordinarily meticulous man. He wrote a book about his activities, which we still have, on the water supply of Rome, which gives us details that otherwise we wouldn't possess about the aqueducts and how they functioned.
It had long been established that the freshest water came not from the river Tiber, but from the foothills and natural springs outside Rome. Provided they flowed from high ground, the springs could be channeled through aqueducts down to the city below. As Roman engineers became more experienced, they were able to defy any obstacle. In time, they would construct a 416-kilometer-long network of tunnels and aqueducts. But before building could start, the degree of slope had to be determined. This angle would become the incline of the aqueduct across hills and valleys all the way to Rome. Before any water entered the aqueduct, it passed through several purification tanks. Here, flow rate was restricted to allow impurities to fall as sediment.
Along most of their route from the hills of Rome into the city, stretches of up to 7 miles, the aqueducts would have been in tunnels like this one, dug often straight through hillsides or under towns and villages. They were dug by hand and beautifully built, so much so that they're the only ancient Roman public service still in regular use today.
To tunnel, the engineers used the Roman mining technique of drilling a vertical shaft every 32 meters as the tunnel progressed through the hill. This meant they could check their alignment accurately by dropping down plumb lines. But when the aqueduct appeared on the other side, the land often sloped away towards the city, so to maintain the flow gradient, the channel had to be raised and supported by a wall of brick or stone. As the ground sloped away further, so the wall was built up. But when it exceeded 2 meters, it became too costly to build. The solution was an architectural innovation the Romans perfected: the arch.
This is an absolutely standard semicircular Roman arch, built with cut stones. It's about 18-foot span, and there may be 27 stones in the whole arch.
The Roman engineers used formwork, a wooden supporting frame, over which the arch was assembled. When the stones were in place, cement was applied and then rubble to build the structure up to the top.
Once the keystone is in, they can strike the wooden frame and let the arch take the weight and all that force coming down the stones finally through the piers to the ground. Then they can finish the aqueduct on top.
With arches, aqueducts could cross valleys. But arches could become unsteady, so Roman engineers had to explore every technique to make them stable. When an aqueduct crossed a river, greater stability was given to the base by specially shaping it to deflect the current. But when arches grew too tall, they could twist and become unstable. So the Roman solution was to limit their height to just 21 meters. Sometimes, to maintain the correct gradient, the aqueducts needed to be even higher, so a second tier of arches was placed above the first. One aqueduct was even built with 3 tiers, 55 meters high. For Roman aqueducts, cement would bring about a breakthrough when engineers discovered a waterproof cement to line the bottom of the channel. It was made from pozzolana, a volcanic ash, which when mixed with lime became a mortar which could even set hard underwater.
This is the channel in the aqueduct that brought the water down to ancient Rome. It's quite wide, and it would have brought about 40 million gallons a day down into the city. Lined as it was with a lime and terracotta mix, it was waterproof along its length.
But why go to all this architectural expense when a pipeline would have done the same job?
The Romans could have brought the water to Rome by pipeline running along the ground surface, but of course that would have had problems to do with the pressure in the pipe. So by putting the water up here on an aqueduct in a channel instead of in a pipe, they could supply it easily and quickly with a simple form of construction. It's covered, of course, to protect it from evaporating and from getting dirty with things blowing into it.
Aqueducts could easily cross plains, but very deep valleys and ravines were a problem. So the Roman engineers built a cistern each side. When they funneled the water down a pipe, its own weight would push it up the other side. The first gravity-driven siphon.
This would be a pipeline which went from the aqueduct down into the valley and up to another tank on the other side where the water could go back into the aqueduct.
When the water finally entered Rome, it filled 3 reservoirs. The first served the essential public supply, the second the public baths, and the third went to private households who paid a water tax. The money levied from the private sector helped to pay for the public water system, which took priority. Controlling the public was the #1 concern of every emperor. Their lives depended on it. Trajan had given Rome the first permanent stadium, a forum, a shopping centre, and regulated the water supply. 100 years later, Rome was under the control of the Emperor Caracalla, and he was to build the Roman people the most lavish public building ever conceived. It was in effect a public palace, the most luxurious and sophisticated health spa of all time, and everyone could go there. Why was the ruthless Caracalla so generous?
What they were concerned with is with their reputation, with their eternal reputation, with building some things that people would remember them for. The baths of Caracalla.
But behind the beauty of Caracalla's baths lay a harsh reality. Caracalla's full name was Emperor Marcus Aurelius Severus Antonius Pius Felix Augustus, remembered chillingly as Caracalla. Like Caligula and Nero before him, Caracalla was one of Rome's most terrifying rulers.
Caracalla is certainly known as one of the major tyrants of the Roman Empire. He allegedly murdered his brother in the presence of his mother, had his brother's name, erased from all monuments in the city of Rome, as well as the image of his wife and father-in-law, and even outside Rome he was renowned as a tyrant. In Alexandria, for instance, where there were people who criticized him, he allegedly initiated a bloodbath.
Caracalla was so hated, he decided to build for the people of Rome a wonder to reverse his failing image. But why build a bath complex?
One of the most evil emperors, Caracalla, a genuine psychopath if ever there was one, oddly enough chose to build baths as his monument. Now what does this mean to us? Well, one way of thinking about this would be an obsessional streak, wanting to wash and clean and cleanse and purify, a kind of way of expressing perhaps even some guilt about what he had done.
Rome already had nearly 1,000 public baths, but Caracalla's overshadowed them all. They covered over 9,000 square meters. The central space alone was larger than the Basilica of St. Peter's, and a branch line was built from the Aqua Marcia to supply them with their own water. Caracalla's cruelty never ceased. His builders were forced to work around the clock in all weathers. Started in 212 AD, his baths were completed in record time. Caracalla employed a workforce of up to 16,000 men. 100,000 scaffolding poles allowed 4,500 bricklayers and 1,800 decorators to get to work.
Caracalla wanted those baths finished as fast as possible, and so he applied enormous pressure to his architects and his engineers. Consequently, it was finished in only 4 years.
The baths catered for every need. But below the surface, the cost of such luxury did not come cheap. The psychotic Roman Emperor Caracalla was in need of some good press, and bestowed upon the people of Rome a sophisticated health spa on a massive scale. Bathers could swim in Olympic-sized swimming pools, rest in enormous sauna rooms, laze in a warm bath 60 meters long, and cool in a plunge pool. There was a gymnasium and exercise rooms, as well as libraries, meeting rooms, and gardens.
As one entered the Baths of Caracalla, one would have been struck by light, and the light glittering off the surfaces of the imported marbles or the mosaics that lined the walls and other parts of the building. Underneath, however, it would have been a world of darkness in the service corridors, heating the water for the baths.
A vast cistern supplied the baths with over 9 million litres of water. It was piped beneath the main building, where it either fed the cold pools or the boilers. An underground network of terracotta pipes distributed hot and cold water while removing all wastewater. There were also enormous corridors storing 2,000 tons of wood. There were 50 fireplaces for the heating of the different rooms above. This efficient system of underfloor heating was known as hypercaust. Terracotta tubes ran inside the walls to provide insulation and channel hot air.
The underworld is sweaty, hot, fearsomely hot, oppressed, cruel, and above they're the leisured class, enjoying their luxury and cleanliness.
There could be as many as 2,000 people in the baths.
You could spend the whole day at the baths. There was plenty to do there. It would take you quite a long time to get through all the different rooms. There was a sort of Turkish bath kind of room. There was a cold room. There was a warm room. There was a swimming pool. You could get a massage. You could get your hair done. You could get your pedicure and your manicure. But you also could have some very important chats. You were very interested in who you might bump into. And there was certainly food and drink available.
The main pool, the Calidarium, was the hottest room. It was domed to allow in the sun's heat and light. The baths were more popular and longer lasting than their creator, Caracalla. On the 8th of April, in the year 217 AD, scarcely a year after the baths' completion, Caracalla was murdered, assassinated by his own bodyguard. The Roman people enjoyed the baths for centuries, but were quick to forget Caracalla, one of the most flawed emperors of all time. Despite poor rulers, turmoil and revolution, Rome would become the nerve center of a vast empire, and all this was made possible by the wonder of Roman roads.
The Romans realized that the maintenance of the empire was directly dependent upon the construction of a successful road system for the easy transport of troops and commodities. And so they used the roads in a way to create a kind of global village.
The first Roman road was the Appian Way, begun in 312 BC by the consul Claudius. Within 200 years, a 288,000-kilometer network would spread out from the city to reach the furthest extremities of the empire. Along them marched great armies. Soon the whole of Europe to the west, Judea to the east, and Egypt to the south fell under Rome's control. At their height, Roman roads were expanding at a rate of half a kilometer every day, and they still survive. What was the secret of their construction? The answer lay in surveying. For this, Roman engineers invented a device called a groma.
The principles of Roman surveying are the same principles that we use today, setting things out on right angles, using level to work out elevation and so on. You'd first of all sight down one axis of it, like this, and then you'd move around and lay out the other line at right angles. And that was pretty effective over short distances. For long distances, the Romans had to use the highest hills they could see in the distance, and they set out poles between where they were now, where they wanted to go, and aligned them in a very, very long line, as straight as they could. They couldn't survey round corners. That's why all Roman roads are straight.
If the obstacle was impassable, the road would take a dogleg around it. But often the roads were cut straight through entire hillsides.